My name is Rebecca, and I'm a 35-year-old housewife. I have a 12-year-old daughter named Pearl, who's currently going through a sensitive phase. Although we occasionally clash, we also share many moments when she helps with household chores, and overall, we have a good parent-child relationship. I was born to parents who owned a small trading company. After graduating from high school and junior college, I started working at an advertising agency. I intended to take over my parents' company someday, but I deliberately chose to work at a general company first to gain some valuable experience. I met my husband, Mike, at a group blind date. He was outgoing, talkative, and had a way of cheering everyone up. In contrast, I was rather shy, so I was naturally attracted to his charm and energy, qualities I felt I lacked. Moreover, Mike was highly educated, having graduated from a prestigious university, and was considered an elite businessman at a well-known company. I was swept off my feet by his intense charm, and we got married without any major issues. After our marriage, Mike became the executive officer set to take over my father's company, while I supported our family from home. The company was thriving, and Mike was expected to eventually become the president. However, everything changed around the time our daughter Pearl was born. Raising a child for the first time was challenging, and I was overwhelmed with the demands of taking care of her day and night, often with little sleep. During those early, exhausting days, my husband began to distance himself. I remember a particularly cruel comment he made when he saw me with dark circles under my eyes from lack of sleep. He looked at me with a disdainful expression and said, "What's with that horrible look on your face? You're already finished as a woman." His words hurt deeply, and they led to a heated argument. I confronted him, saying, "You could at least help a little. You don't do anything around here, and just keep saying you're busy with work every day." To this he shot back, "That's because I'm being used by someone's father, isn't it? Don't blame others." Frustrated, I nearly threw something at him, but I stopped when Pearl began to cry. After that argument, our relationship only became more strained. Instead of helping with the household chores or childcare, Mike started leaving the house more often, claiming he was busy with work. However, I had a suspicion that he wasn't really going to work. Despite these issues, I didn't consider divorce at the time. I didn't want to worry my parents, and I thought it would be better for Pearl if we stayed together. When Mike was at home, he would lock himself in his room and avoid interacting with me or our daughter. He even began to harass me financially. One day, he handed me only $600 for the monthly living expenses and calmly said with a mean smile, "Try to manage with this." I was outraged and replied, "How do you expect me to live on this for a month? I'm not working, and with a child, we can't even cover our food expenses with this much." Despite my protests, he didn't care, and I had to use my savings from before our marriage to get by. Mike continued to put on a good front in front of my parents and his colleagues, acting like a devoted employee and husband. When I tried to talk to my parents about the way he was treating me, they didn't believe me. They ended up scolding me, saying that maybe I wasn't trying hard enough to make things work. I felt isolated and struggled with housework and raising Pearl on my own. By the time Pearl entered elementary school, I began helping out at my parents' company. The work was extremely demanding, especially since Mike was often away on so-called business trips, leaving me to handle not only my share of the work but his as well. Despite the difficulties, I pushed through for the sake of my daughter and to avoid burdening my parents. As Pearl entered middle school, a significant conflict arose in our home. One day, Pearl witnessed Mike's infidelity. I had been aware of his unfaithfulness for a while, but chose to ignore it for the sake of my daughter. However, Pearl saw him walking with another woman at a shopping mall and confronted him when she got home. "Dad, who is that woman you were with at the mall?" she asked. Mike, showing no remorse, casually responded, "She's just a friend." Pearl pressed further, "Really? Is she really just a friend?" At this point, Mike lost his temper and yelled, "If I say she's my friend, then she's my friend. Don't interfere in adult affairs." His outburst frightened Pearl, who turned to me and said, "Mom, please don't wash Dad's clothes with ours anymore." Mike's reaction was shocking, and he didn't even bother to deny his infidelity. Instead, he arrogantly declared, "I'm going to be the president of this company. It's natural to have one or two women." I was stunned by his blatant admission, but there was little I could do. I had already been disappointed in him for a long time, and this just solidified my feelings. Despite everything, I continued to manage the household and help with the company, even though the number of times I had to run the washing machine increased due to Mike's actions. Meanwhile, plans were underway for the company's 20th anniversary event, and my husband was heavily involved. My husband continued to be absent from home for extended periods, claiming it was due to work. However, his behavior at home was just as concerning. One day, he suddenly ordered me, "You're going to be in charge of organizing our company's anniversary event. Got it? If you embarrass me, I won't tolerate it." With that, he shifted all the responsibility for planning the anniversary event onto me. As a result, my workload became even more demanding than before. Luckily, some of the staff stepped in to help, but I still found myself working late into the night every day. One evening, after wrapping up my work duties as usual, I returned home and immediately started doing housework. As I finally sat down to eat dinner with my daughter, everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was lying in a hospital bed. My body had finally given out due to the exhaustion. When I opened my eyes, I saw my parents and my daughter standing by my bedside, looking at me with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" my daughter asked, her voice trembling. "The doctor said it's overwork. I've tried calling Dad dozens of times, but he won't pick up. Isayat, Isi, maybe your dad is just busy." Just then, my phone rang. It was my husband. Without even asking about my condition, he began yelling, "What are you lazing around for? What are you going to do if this affects the event? Can you take responsibility for taking time off?" After berating me, he abruptly hung up. I lay there, feeling nothing but emptiness. It was as if he were a stranger masquerading as my husband. Tears began to stream down my face as I realized how little he cared for me. My daughter noticed and asked, "Mom, what's wrong? Did Dad say something awful again?" Seeing the worry in her eyes and the look of concern from my parents, I decided it was time to open up. I told them everything that had been happening for years, that my husband had been neglecting our family, avoiding his responsibilities, and being cruel to our daughter. I confessed that no one seemed to understand the pain I was going through. My parents listened quietly until I finished. Then my mother said, "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I had no idea you were suffering so much. Please, tell us if there's anything you need. We'll always be here for you." My father added, "The event is already prepared. We can handle the rest of the details." Taking their words to heart, I decided then and there to confront my husband about his mistreatment. I hired a private detective, and it didn't take long for them to uncover evidence of my husband's infidelity. Moreover, we discovered that his so-called business trips were just a cover. Through his travel patterns and receipts, we gathered substantial evidence of his lies. I consulted with a lawyer to understand the maximum amount of compensation I could claim, not just for his affair, but also for the damage he had caused to his company with his fabricated business trips. I showed all the evidence I had collected to my parents. They were shocked and then furious. "He deserves to pay for what he's done," my father declared. I decided to proceed with filing for divorce, but my father had something to say. "Rebecca," he said, "I understand you want to end things with him right away, but with the event coming up next week, please bear with me a little longer. I have an idea." Trusting my father, I agreed to wait. The day of the anniversary event arrived. We welcomed many guests from various places, making it a grand affair. Even the mayor made an appearance. In such a glamorous setting, my husband was visibly proud, even though he hadn't contributed anything to the event's success. After the initial greetings, the reception-style dinner began. I was sitting with my daughter at my parents' table when my husband approached us. With great pride, he boasted to my father, "How do you like the party I organized?" It's quite something, isn't it? This party is special. It's our 20th anniversary, so it had to be exceptional. But don't worry, you can leave everything to me. Hearing his false claims, my daughter couldn't hold back. Dad, that's a lie. You didn't do anything. Mom did all the work. And besides, you have a crush on someone else. I saw you at the mall with another woman who wasn't Mom. My husband glared at our daughter and hissed, Pearl, didn't I tell you before not to meddle in adult affairs? With a forced smile, he turned back to my father and said, No worries, sir. It's just childish talk. Anyway, about my promotion to CO. My father, not to be outdone, replied with a cryptic smile, Yes, about that. Just wait for the announcement of the new personnel changes after this. As the party entered its final phase, it was time for the announcement of the personnel changes by my father, who was the current president. My husband stood there, holding a glass of wine, looking quite pleased with himself. My family and I watched him with a mix of disgust and pity. He no longer seemed like family to us. Then, my father began his speech. Thank you all for coming to our company's 20th anniversary celebration, despite your busy schedules. Today, I, William Tucker, have decided to retire as president and pass on the torch to my successor. The room fell silent as everyone waited for my father to continue. My husband's face lit up with a wide smile, eagerly awaiting the announcement. I hereby appoint my daughter, Rebecca, as the new president, my father declared. The room erupted into loud applause, and I could see the shock and disbelief on my husband's face as he stood there with his mouth hanging open. The party ended without incident, and as we started clearing up, my husband ran over to my father. Why? What's going on here? He demanded. I said exactly what I meant, my father replied calmly. And as for you, Mike, it's time for you to leave the company. What? How could you? Why? My husband stuttered. You know the reasons better than anyone else, my father responded. This must be Rebecca's doing, isn't it? My husband accused, glaring at me. Did you say something to your father about this? I met his gaze steadily. No, I haven't done anything, I replied. I simply told my parents the truth. As soon as I entered the room, I scattered the documents I had in my hand all over the floor. The papers fluttered down, revealing numerous photos of my husband's affair and irrefutable evidence of his fake business trips. My husband's face turned ashen as he took in the damning evidence scattered around him. His eyes widened in shock and disbelief. How could you get these? When did you? He stammered, his voice trembling. When you were away on your so-called business trips, of course. I replied calmly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I gathered all the evidence of your infidelity and your fabricated travels. You can't deny it anymore. My father, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward and picked up a few of the photographs. Holding them up, he addressed my husband with a stern voice. Well, this is how it's going to be. We'll make sure to charge interest on the expenses for your fake business trips. And as for the cost of your affair, you'll repay my daughter every cent. That's for sure. Wait a minute. Damn it, Rebecca. My husband shouted in frustration, his face contorting with anger. He lunged at me, his hand raised as if to strike. But just as he did, a passing guest tripped over a chair leg and stumbled right into him, knocking him off balance. My husband fell hard onto the floor, groaning in pain. You'll pay for this, both of you, he shouted, struggling to get up. Sure, I replied coolly, but we won't be seeing you anymore anyway. From now on, please contact our lawyer for any matters. I handed him a business card from a law firm I had hired. By this time, the security guards, alerted by the commotion, arrived and restrained my husband. They escorted him out of the venue, his protests fading as they led him away. A few months later, I successfully divorced my husband. After being kicked out of the house, he struggled to find a new job and was burdened with a hefty settlement fee. However, I no longer had any connection to his difficulties. As long as he paid me the settlements as agreed, his life was no concern of mine. As for me, I took over my father's company and began to steadily grow the business. My daughter, who had been shielded from the worst of the divorce's impact, continued to enjoy a happy student life. It was as if she had never had a father in the first place. One day, she turned to me and said with a bright smile, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll be a good enough person to be entrusted with this company." Her words were so heartwarming that they filled me with hope for the future. There was another happy event for me, too. I received a second marriage proposal in my life. The man who proposed to me was Hector, the very person who had accidentally tripped my ex-husband when he tried to attack me. Hector was the president of one of our company's clients, and like me, he was also a divorcee. We had hit it off while watching my husband being escorted out by the security guards that day. As we stood there together, he had remarked, "A great party was almost ruined by him. It's a good thing this commotion happened after the party." Yes, he was really a terrible husband, I admitted, feeling a strange sense of relief to be sharing my burden with someone who seemed to understand. He cheated, took fake business trips. Almost without realizing it, I found myself blurting out my life story to Hector. He listened with a sympathetic ear and then said, "Sounds like you've been through a lot, but looking at your daughter, it's all worth it. You are a good wife and a good mother." Listening to our conversation, my daughter smiled happily. A few days later, we ran into Hector again at a nearby cafe. We decided to have coffee together and ended up having a great time, just the three of us. That initial meeting led to more meals together, even when my daughter wasn't with us. Each time we spent together, I realized more and more what a great person Hector was. He told me the cause of his divorce was his ex-wife's extravagant spending. We had been friends for a while when one day he said to me, "I'd like to get to know each other better. If that's okay with you, would you consider officially dating me?" "Oh, of course," I replied, feeling my heart flutter. "I mean, if I can get Pearl's permission." My daughter, who was sitting beside us, immediately chimed in, "Of course, that's a no-brainer." And so, things went smoothly, and Hector and I got married for the second time. Our married life has been wonderful. My daughter no longer gets angry when I wash the laundry along with Hector's. He seemed to fulfill every wish my daughter had, and she began to feel as if she had been his daughter from the beginning. One day, she came to us with a request, "Mom, Dad, I want a baby sister." Given my age, I knew it would be difficult for me to get pregnant, so we decided to adopt a kitten as a solution. My daughter fell in love with a kitten at an animal shelter adoption event. We named her Cleo, and my daughter took care of her as if she were a real sister. As I watched them together, I thought to myself, I think I finally have a real family. Let's do our best to nurture this family with my beloved husband and our new kitten. That's what I vowed in my heart.